We're on. Hey everybody, we're back. It's Tuesday. It's 6 o'clock Eastern Standard, and I didn't know I was on camera. But we are here. We're ready to talk Oakenfist, and as always, we start with a quick technical check. If everyone says I sound good or good enough, then we proceed. Looks like we're good. So I'm going to start with a quote. As King's Justice, the dungeons were his responsibility. Since he lacked a tongue, Payne had largely left the running of those dungeons to his underlings, but Cersei held him to blame for Tyrion's escape all the same. It was my work, not his, Jaime almost told her. Instead, he had promised to find what answers he could from the chief under-jailer, a bent-back old man named Renifer Longwaters. I see you wonder, what sort of name is that? The man had cackled when Jaime went to question him. It is an old name, 'tis true. I am not one to boast, but there is royal blood in my veins. I am descended from a princess. My father told me the tale when I was a tad of a lad. Longwaters had not been a tad of a lad for many a year, to judge from his spotted head and the white hairs growing from his chin. She was the fairest treasure of the maiden vault. Lord Oakenfist, the great admiral, lost his heart to her, though he was married to another. She gave their son the bastard name of Waters in honor of his father, and he grew to be a great knight, as did his own son, who put the long before the waters, so men might know that he was not basely born himself. So I have a little dragon in me. Yes, I almost mistook you for Aegon the Conqueror, Jaime had answered. Yeah. Hello and welcome back to History of Westeros' weekly Fire and Blood live streams. This one is going to expand beyond Fire and Blood because Oakenfist's life is so long and interesting that it covers beyond just the time span of Fire and Blood. It goes well into what will be covered by Fire and Blood 2. His name pops up in the main series. His descendants are in the main series. So there's just a lot to talk about. He's a really fascinating character, and I'm excited to dive into him and bring out a lot of these parallels and just a lot of the fun details of the fun story. So I'm Aziz, as always. My name doesn't change from week to week. And Deshay is not here today. She is on the other side of the camera. And so I'm doing this one solo, no guests or anything this time. So we'll see how that goes. Should go just as well as a lot of our scripted episodes, which is how a lot of them are. Speaking of scripted episodes, Bloodraven 3 is completed. It's as in the filming and recording, but the editing and production is not finished yet. So that should be too much longer, though. We have a guest producer for this one, so we don't exactly know how long it will take. Heck, we don't exactly know how long it's going to take even when we're doing it. So, but in any case, it should be fairly soon, and we'll be announcing that when it's fully complete. Thanks to the patrons who help make this show possible via financial support on a recurring basis. Especially for episodes like Bloodraven that take a lot of behind-the-scenes work and lots of production, things like that. Less so than these live streams. But of course, this live stream had a lot of research in it too. Oakenfist has there's just so much to say. This is one of the longer episode documents we have, which is a little surprising considering we're just talking about one character. But hey, there's a lot that a single character can do, right? So thanks to Jeff Gnarly the Long Snapper, History of Westeros' First Sword, and to our Dragon Rider patrons. That includes Talanis the Talon, King of Gagassos, Rider of Talarius, a red dragon with scales, horns, and talons of midnight black. Jinx of House Lier, Green Queen of the Rainwood, rumored daughter of a woods witch, Rider of Irigenia, a sylphic albino dragon with amethyst eyes and opalescent wings. And Robert IV of House Ardeacor, Burned King of Blazewater Bay, Rider of Atraxis, a black dragon with bioluminescent spots like smoldering embers and a banded blue tail. Okay. Yeah, so that's didn't have a lot of announcements today, except for one other thing, which is that I want to say that both Con of Thrones and Ice and Fire Con are coming up. Ice and Fire Con is coming up in April, and Con of Thrones in July. We'll be at both of them, and when I say we, I mean all three of us, Sean, Ashea, and me, and you can get $5 off purchasing a ticket through either of those cons by using the code HISTORY. And we really hope to see you there. Both of them are super fun, and yeah, really worth saving up for if it's tough. But it's definitely an amazing experience, both of them. Okay, so I mentioned as always that there's parallels with Oakenfist, and in particular, rather than playing the guessing game we do sometimes, they're just going to be kind of woven in because all the parallels surround Oakenfist, and I think a lot of these parallels are kind of straightforward once they're pointed out. and he doesn't really parallel one character super strongly. There's more like, I'd say, 3 characters that he has a lot in common with. In some spots, he has some aspects of these other characters, he's not like them at all. But in some ways, the connections are really tight. These characters are Davos, Orain Waters, and Daemon Targaryen, as in the rogue prince Daemon Targaryen. So as we go through these episodes, you'll see a lot of those parallels pop up. Okay, so we're going to start with Driftmark and Hull and the Valyrian lands and all that. I'll just give a little background on that. And of course, we are going to be doing a Sea Snake episode as well. It's a little funny that we're doing his kid before the father, but hey, that's how it worked out. Our Sea Snake episode is going to have a lot of art prepared for it, so it's a little more production that's being done on that one. Now, islands by themselves are kind of known for being a little bit off, like different, not off. I mean, it sounds weird. I mean, like they're a little different than the mainland. Not in a bad way, not necessarily in a good way either. Sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But that's not really the point. This isn't a judgment thing. It's more about differences. Bear Island, great example. Their culture is different than a lot of the rest of the North. Skagos, vastly different than just about anything. It's this weird sort of proto-wildlings sort of melting pot of the North and the wildlings and throw in cannibals. Then the Iron Islands, massively different. They have their own religion. The 3 sisters, right? These are, the names keep coming, and every time I mention one, you're like, oh yeah, they're a little different. The Arbor, the Shield Islands. The shields are where you have sort of reach values, but combined with naval attitudes, naval culture, which is most of the reach is very much not like that. Dragonstone, very unique in itself. And then we have lesser known places like Witch Isle, which is off the coast of the Fingers there, and is one day we'll have to talk about that one more. I don't want to get too off topic. As I said, there's so much to talk about with this one. Let's see. We have so I always wonder what kind of differences there were on Driftmark. Like what's the kind of the unique aspect of Driftmark? What's different about it? One thing to note about it is how far out it is. It's got being in the narrow sea in Blackwater Bay. It has these connections to a lot of the free cities because of trade, and of course it has connections to Dragonstone. Not just because it's close by, but because the Valyrians took both of them. The Valyrians maybe came to Westeros before the Targaryens. They certainly claim they did. And, it's interesting, the way they divided the lands. I mean, Driftmark is a very fertile island. It's a little unusual maybe that no one had taken it by that point. And Dragonstone has, a decent bit of fertility to it. But of course, the Targaryens took that in part because of the volcanoes. That was pretty crucial, whereas the Valyrians didn't have that particular concern. And of course, they built their several castles there, and several castles there and some cities that popped up as the place grew more and more. Excuse me, had to mute to sneeze there. Anyway, so. We have, at this point, the Driftmark grew up really big and powerful and through trade with a lot of the free cities. And it's just a really good island for building wealth. We see their fortunes go up and down quite a few times, but they always have the means to recover them. The exception being current times, where they're not really doing so great in terms of wealth. They're not doing badly, but they're nowhere near what they were, which is, in the times of Oakenfist's young life, they were richer than even the Lannisters or the Hightowers, which is kind of crazy to think about. So in terms of falling, they've fallen really far. But when you're super wealthy like that, you can fall pretty far and still be important, still be significant, which is the case of the Velaryons. Monford Velaryon was loyal to Stannis, but he dies during the Battle of the Blackwater. And his son, who's now 6, is apparently still loyal to Stannis because Velaryon banners were seen when Stannis smashed Mance Rayder. And this half-brother of Monford is none other than Orain Waters, who I mentioned is a lot of Oakenfist parallels. There's a question here. Rebecca Santa says, what's Aziz's t-shirt? Well, let's see. My shirt, it's true that I am wearing an unusual shirt. It's not a Game of Thrones shirt for once. And I didn't really have a good nautical themed Game of Thrones shirt other than my Manderley shirt, which is a mermaid or merman, which is, that's a whole different house's sigil. This is a band called Scale the Summit, and hey, it's got a ship on it and an eagle. It just kind of it fits the nautical theme. It was the closest I could get. Scale the Summit's a really good post-metal instrumental band. I highly recommend them. Good. A lot of episodes have been written while I've listened to Scale the Summit. I like instrumental music while writing. Okay, and it's unclear how much of the decline of House Velaryon's wealth is on Oakenfist. Certainly, the destruction of all the Sea Snake's treasures is not on him. He wasn't even Lord then, Sea Snake was. But there is some evidence that he maybe wasn't the best with money, while being good at just about everything else. So anyway, but of course the other caveat with this episode is most of what we know about his later life is pretty vague. The stuff that's outside of Fire and Blood, he dies way after Fire and Blood ends. He dies in the year 175, which is the year Bloodraven was born. So, right, he glamored himself to be baby Bloodraven, right? No, of course not. But he died around 60-ish. He vanished at sea, so we don't actually know what year. It may not have been 175. That's kind of when they declared that, hey, he's probably never coming back. When someone disappears at sea, you don't have a specific date. You just have to go, I guess he vanished sometime around then. And we don't really know a lot about his big voyages, which is kind of too bad because those are really interesting. We love the adventure stories. We love the exploration stories. But we do have some guesses on some of those, which we'll get to in good time. We'll start at his birth here, now that we've had some background on Driftmark and House Velaryon. Alyn of Hull, he was born. Of course, that's a bastard name. His brother Addam was born over 1 year earlier, roughly, and they grew up together. Their quote-unquote father is Laenor Velaryon, but we all should know, if you've taken just a few minutes to look at any of this stuff, it's pretty clear Laenor was not the dad. He was unambiguously gay, and of course, we don't believe he was the father of the strong children because of the brown hair, and with all that, it makes it extremely unlikely that he was having bastards on the side. If he's not interested in women, he's definitely not sneaking off to have sex with one. So it's very likely that the commonly believed story that Corlys Velaryon himself is the father of both Addam and Alyn is true, and that is how we're going to proceed, as if that's a fact. And there's just a couple of pieces of detail to seal that up in terms of the logic there and why I'm so certain. If they were Laenor's, why would the mother refuse to name the father? Because that would be a good thing. And why would they need to be kept away from Rhaenys, who is part of the reason that Corlys supposedly didn't acknowledge the bastards until after his wife died? Because apparently she had a hot temper and wouldn't want her husband's bastards around. Maybe a bit like, kind of the inverse of Ned and Jon and Lyanna. Instead of pretending the kid is his when it's not, he pretends the kid isn't his, only for the world to figure out the truth later, which is presumably coming for Jon as well. People are going to learn the truth, if not everyone going to learn the truth. Imagine Jon at Kat's hands, but where Kat was cold, Rhaenys would be fiery and with a dragon. So imagine Catelyn with a dragon. I don't think Ned could. It would be harder for Ned to keep that secret if Catelyn had a dragon. She'd be like, no, you're going to tell me this whole story. The mother of both of these boys, Addam and Alyn, was Merilda of Hull, a.k.a. Mouse, who was a pretty awesome character. She's kind of overshadowed by her kids and her famous lovers, both the fake one and the real one, Corlys, but really just a neat character. She inherited her father's lands, and which was he was a shipwright, so she inherited his shipbuilding facilities, and they were basically raised at these facilities. And since Corlys didn't claim them until later, she was the one that raised them. So she's, the only parent figure early on in their life. And they took after her in a lot of ways. She's described as small and quick and clever, and that's how they're described. And brave, very brave. She's considered very brave, and both Addam and Alyn, their lives prove that unquestionably, that they were brave. and ambitious. Perhaps all three of them. Maybe Addam wasn't super ambitious, but Marilda made a big life for herself. She expanded on her business, did different things, traded, built her own ship, did things like that. And Alyn, of course, rose very high. Addam died too young for us to know what his full life would have looked like and whether he would have aimed for high offices or things like that. But he certainly proved himself in battle. So I think that the fact that she was a shipwright and her father was a shipwright is almost certainly the reason that there was this connection in the first place. They probably built ships for the Velaryons, and that would be why Corlys was in contact with them. He would have come by the shipwright and been, hey, make me some ships, and oh, hey, your daughter, I do like her. So yeah, so that's pretty neat. I also wonder if about the general people of Driftmark. How many settlers came from Valyria when the Velaryons settled there? Did they bring a lot of other silver-haired people there? The reason I ask is because Alyn and Addam were both purple-haired, silver-haired, purple eyes, like the Valyrians have. So their heritage is very straightforward as far as that goes. But we don't know if it just came directly from their father, that look, or whether it was from both their parents. So, but it's an interesting little academic question there. We wonder about the average genetics of the Velaryon small folk and the minor nobility. For one thing, the Velaryons, whichever settlers did come over with the original Velaryons, surely it had to be some. They didn't just come, just their household and nobody. It would have only been about 250 to 300 years prior to all this. So not a pretty long time, but not a super, super long time. If they brought enough Valyrian blood over, you'd still have a lot of silver-haired, purple-eyed people over there. So around 125 is the year she sold her shipyards, and this is when she bought a trading cog. Surely it says that she used the proceeds to buy a trading cog, but surely she had a lot more left over, because I don't know that you'd sell a place that makes ships and all you get is one ship out of a place that makes ships. So I figured there's a lot left over for her to put in the bank there. She names her ship Mouse after her. And this is also really important for Addam and Alyn, because on this ship, during her trading ventures, is where Alyn and Addam kind of cut their teeth in terms of sailing. First of all, they're growing up around a dock, a shipwright, so they're already growing up around sailors and naval types. But then they actually get to go sailing from a pretty early age and learn the ropes. That applies to sailing. And become sailors for life, basically. I guess Addam, again, didn't have a chance to fulfill that full dream, and I guess flying a dragon's probably a little more interesting than sailing. But, for the rest of normal people, that's not an option. Super chat from Craig Mulvey. So glad I finally made a live stream. I'm really enjoying y'all's Fire and Blood coverage. Can't wait to hear your take on Oakenfist's unlikely rise. I'd call it unparalleled, but I doubt that will stop you. Yeah. It is a little unparalleled. I don't know. Like I said, it was hard to find one-to-one parallels for characters like him. I had to use 3 at least, and there's probably good other calls there that connecting to other characters. I'm sure it isn't limited to those 3. Those are just 3 that stood out to me. And when you have a rich, full life like this that we don't even have all the details on, there's bound to be some strong parallels out there. All right, this next section, this early first section, we can call it, besides the early life stuff, is called Dancing with Dragons. One of the first things that he and his brother were known for is dancing with dragons. Sea Smoke was kind of a sort of the Velaryon dragon in a way. Like, the dragons are mostly Targaryen, right? But Sea Smoke was kind of Velaryon. The families are related. They share a lot of blood, so these things are kind of hard to be too distinct with, but Sea Snoke was Sea Snoke. Whoa, I got Star Wars in there. Sea Snoke. Wow, Snoke's aquatic younger brother. That's when he. Yeah. So you can. I guess you guys probably all heard a Shay laugh at that. What a funny one. Okay, little. Well, what is that? What is that? A Freudian slip there. So So Sea Smoke was written by Laenor, and later written by Addam. So you can see why I'm like, this is kind of a Velaryon dragon. Sea Smoke wasn't written by a person that had the name Targaryen. So you can see why I categorize him that way. So when Laenor dies back in 120, I believe it was, and Seasmoke has no rider for a while. But when the call for dragon seeds come, interestingly, it's not Addam and Alyn who get to go first. It's Lord Commander Stefan Darklyn, Rhaenyra's Kingsguard head, which is kind of weird because you wonder what they were thinking, right? This stuff probably would have been better in our dragon episode, but it's pretty relevant here. How did this guy think he could do it? Did he think he was a seed? Did he think he had dragon blood in his past? I guess he probably did. And that makes sense because the Darklyns are one of the closest families to the Targaryens. They had 7 members join the Kingsguard over their span. And so I'm guessing maybe they had a princess in their history that was married into their family from the Targaryens. It's got to be something, right? I don't think this Darklyn guy's just like, yeah, I can do this. I don't need dragon blood. Because so much of this is made about dragon seeds. So I don't know. It kind of seems strange to me that he would just, I don't have dragon blood, but I'm doing this. So he probably did. And of course, the Velaryons do have dragon blood. That's very straightforward. But it gets a little off here with thinking about where the dragon blood comes from. Addam apparently has no trouble taming Seasmoke. We don't hear about any issue, no struggle, no danger. It just happened. It probably did happen on Driftmark, though, because that's where Seasmoke probably was. I almost called him Seasmoke again. And this may have emboldened Alyn to try because it worked for his brother. Although I think he was probably already pretty eager to try because he seems to have that kind of personality. So yeah, like I wanted to say here, the Dragon Rider implications are kind of weird. I talked about House Darklyn and how maybe they have something going on. But if Laenor isn't the father of Addam and Alyn, which we believe, then it makes it a little trickier to see where the dragon blood came from. Certainly in the past, some Targaryen bride marrying into House Velaryon makes sense. But we don't actually know who that is. It would actually make a lot of sense if it was Laenor, because Laenor is the son of Rhaenys, who is definitely a Targaryen. So that in one sense is the only bit of evidence that points to Laenor being the father of Addam and Alyn, but it's too little. It's not enough evidence given all the other counter evidence. And some people wonder, I see some people in the chat are wondering if Merilda was a dragon seed. Hey, you know what? I didn't consider that, and it's 100% possible. 100% possible. So there's a couple different ways this dragon blood could have gotten into their veins, so to speak. And once again, this comes with the caveat, if that's even necessary. LML. Hey, what's up, LML, in the chat there? He says, how much sea smoke could a sea snoke smoke if a sea snoke could smoke sea smoke? Okay, so we've already covered our tongue twister for the day. I'm not saying that one 3 times fast, though. Also from Tommy Pappas, super chat with no comment. Well, thank you, silent supporter. So next up is Sheep Stealer, which is more directly in line with Alyn, because he is trying to tame Sheep Stealer. He first tries for Grey Ghost, which presumably he had to go to Dragonstone to do this. That's where Grey Ghost lives. And he presumably had his brother's help. And so, because like walking around looking for Grey Ghost on foot sounds kind of not very likely to work. But if Addam is flying around on sea smoke, that's a lot more effective, I would think. So he tries for Sheep Stealer instead because he can't find Grey Ghost. And this is really brave. Sheep Stealer kills twice as many as the other twice as many seeds as the other wild dragons combined. Now that's a loaded statement. The other, quote unquote, the other wild dragons combined, there's only 3 wild dragons, as in wild ones who hadn't been tamed before. So that means Sheep Stealer killed twice as many dragon seeds as Grey Ghost and the Cannibal combined. Well, we just pointed out that Grey Ghost is really hard to find. Grey Ghost, so most people probably didn't try to ride Grey Ghost that often. So that means that all these deaths are on the Cannibal. The Cannibal! Who is older and scarier. So Sheep Stealer killed more dragon seeds than the Cannibal. Part of that's because the Cannibal is scarier and people are smart enough not to even try in the first place. But still, anyway you slice it, this is really, really brave. And we don't even think Alyn tried for the Cannibal. He did, because he's small and quick, this is probably part of why he survived. We have cats doing all sorts of things off camera here. He was Sheep Stealer was kind of known to the people of Driftmark already because he or she ranged that far to find sheep. So that may have been another reason why Alyn was particularly aware of Sheep Stealer and aiming to tame her, because versus the cannibal for all the other reasons that he wouldn't want to try to tame the cannibal. I'm just really switching my N's and M's today. I just said cannibal. Is that some sort of disease, N and M switching? I don't know, but I have it today. I'm infected with NMitis. And when the bonding attempt with Sheep Stealer went badly, he got burned. And maybe I'm exaggerating how much his quickness helped him, because it also says that his brother flew sea smoke in, almost did it again, and rescued him, drove off Sheep Stealer. So, yeah. Now, interestingly, a little side note, Alyn's career, full of success, full of wins. But one of two things he's maybe not so good at, money was one of them. Another one is patience. And we see here that patience is what worked for Nettles. Nettles got Sheep Stealer by being patient, and Alyn just went for it, didn't work, and moved on. So I think that's a good little note, important to take into account here. So, not long after the taming of Sea Smoke, and I'm saying that word very carefully now, Corlys, the sea snake, not the sea smake, petitions Rhaenyra, not Rhaenyra, to legitimize them, and she does. And Addam is named heir to Driftmark as well, because he immediately becomes the eldest Velaryon in line. And now there's a little bit of stuff with the Velaryons who were in line for Rhaenyra's Velaryons who were in line for the Iron Throne, but that's another side. We're not going to bother with talking about that. Addam fights in the Battle of the Gullet, which was that really bloody, nasty battle where Aegon III was traumatized, where Viserys was captured, where a whole bunch of ships were sunk, where Jacaerys and Vermax died. And it affected him. Addam was... I don't know, trauma might not be the right word, but it probably is. And he went and talked to Lord Corlys about it. And surely, given his closeness to his brother, Alyn heard about it. So Alyn's first experience, quote unquote, with war would have been hearing about it from his brother. And it didn't seem to dampen his enthusiasm for ambition, but it maybe was a little bit sobering. And of course, it's going to be a really big deal, their relationship. And there's lots of evidence that Alyn, or at least some very specifically strong points of evidence that Alyn had a lot of respect for his brother. And of course, at this point, Addam's already saved his life once. So, I don't know, he's got a lot to be grateful for, even if they weren't tight. And it seems like they were tight, so. And of course, all other thing that happened in the Battle of Gullet, besides this personal stuff, is that Driftmark took heavy losses, not just ships, but they got invaded. This High Tide, the really cool castle of Velaryon, the really cool Velaryon castle that DraftRG is making some awesome art for us to show during the Sea Snake episode, was sacked. And that's where he had all his Eastern treasures, the Sea Snake had, from all his voyages. He collected them there, all his insane wealth. The reason they were rated above the Lannisters and Hightowers, destroyed. So this is a huge loss for the Velaryons. And this is also the beginning of other things going bad for the Velaryons. Excuse me. He was at, sneezing and burping. I'm just doing everything today. Saying N's as M's. See, maybe I'm not so good by myself after all. I need a guest or another person here, or I've mispronounced things and become gross. So he was at Driftmark, Alyn, when the alliance between the Velaryons and Targaryens fell apart due to Rhaenyra and her council's kind of inexplicable paranoia with regard to bastards. I guess it's not inexplicable, it's just crazy. The over-the-top beliefs that non-bastards, especially nobility, have about bastards and how little trust they can have for them is just never ceases to be over the top. But it's consistent. So it's not like, I don't think it's, not realistic given what George has laid out. It's just amazing. So they move to arrest Addam, the one dragon rider in town, because the rest of them are out doing other stuff or dead. But Corlys, after arguing vociferously that this is not only dumb, but unnecessary, and just all these bad ideas. He points out all the things that's wrong with this idea. And since they don't listen to him, he goes and warns his son, and Addam escapes. They figure out or assume that he warned him, and I mean, they were right. And he was then treated roughly and thrown in a cell. So Addam goes off. Addam responds to this accusation of treason in the most noble way imaginable, not by turning sides, which is what a lot of people would do. It would be like, you think I'm your enemy? Well, fine, I'm going to be your enemy. That's how you're going to treat me. Instead, he just one-ups them and says, oh, I'm not loyal. I'm going to show you loyal. And he flies around to a lot of the castles that are still semi-loyal to the Black's cause, gets a ragtag army of 4,000 formed together by racing to these different castles and getting as much support as possible, and saves King's Landing. I mean, it's incredible what he did, and it's another really bloody battle that he participates in, the Second Battle of Tumbleton, and it stops the Greens' advance on King's Landing, like I said. But, of course, it also featured a lot of losses, like Addam himself, as well as a lot of other people who are, maybe not so relevant for this episode. So, other than trying to tame Sheepstealer, Alyn was very much in his brother's shadow at this point. He didn't have a dragon. He didn't have this, amazing display of loyalty, which I have to think permanently impacted how people saw bastards. I mean, Addam wasn't just representing his house and himself. He was representing all bastards. He was like, look, this is bull. we can be just as loyal as anybody else. We aren't made differently in the way y'all think. So it's a pretty cool, underrated scene in the Dance of the Dragons and in Fire and Blood and War of the Ice and Fire, because it pops up there as well. But it's huge for Alyn on a personal level. If we're trying to get in his shoes and in his head, it's a monstrous incident in his life, especially considering how young he is. He's like 15-ish at this point. So from this point on, though, he's no longer going to be in the shadows. He basically takes the stage and keeps it, starting now. And this is where he's like a character that I didn't mention for a parallel, because he's not really like this character that much, but in this moment he kind of is. And it's like Robb. He's a 15-year-old young lord in charge of an ancient house because the young king has his father in prison, which Corlys is still alive at this point, but he's in prison just like Ned was. And he's a bit like Jon vaguely here, because his badass serious brother died a hero without heirs of his own, and he becomes the heir of his serious badass brother, Jon, just like Addam, just like Alyn, rather. But the huge difference between Alyn and Jon, among other things, and with Robb, is Alyn had a lot more military power. He had, especially because dragons were effectively off the table at this point. Ships are always powerful, but ships, when there's no dragons, way more powerful, because ships versus dragons is bad news for the ships, even when they get lucky and take out a dragon like they did in the Gullet. So the other side effect of the sea snake being thrown in jail meant mass defections of Velaryon men who simply just melted away from King's Landing, catching ship here and there, making their way back to Driftmark, and coming back as part of Alyn's army. And this army of Alyn's is interesting. He had a little bit of a tough spot here because he's got his father in jail, and he can't just go buck wild attacking things. The most important thing is to keep his father alive. So he has to be threatening so that they can't just kill his father without worry of retribution. But if he gets too aggressive, then they can kill his father as in their version of retribution. So it's a bit of a tightrope walk. And but I said that Aegon II had the sea snake in prison, but he didn't personally have him in prison because he himself, Aegon II, was still trapped on Dragonstone because Sunfire was dead. It was Cregan Stark who had thrown the sea snake in jail back then. So we have a lot of different sort of confusing back and forth ambitions and things that people are aiming for here. So what he was trying to do is planning to attack Dragonstone to maybe capture Aegon II and do some sort of trade, like capture Aegon for trade Aegon for his father. Maybe kind of like Robb considered would have considered Jaime swapping for Ned before that became impossible because Ned's head was separated from his body. So there is no Steps of Baelor moment for the Sea Snake. I guess Alyn's ships were more of a threat than Robb's host. And Rhaenyra was a lot more like Cersei than Joffrey. And Alicent also was around, and she was there to cut a deal. I'm sorry, I misspoke when I said Cregan Stark threw Sea Snake in jail. That's later. This time it was Alicent who freed Corlys from prison and cut a deal with him, which had him joining the Greens in exchange for peace, which meant Alyn had to back off because his father's still in charge. And that means that Aegon now gets to come to King's Landing, and Alyn gets to bring him as the guy with all the ships. And he does this. This is one of the first of many examples of him being insolent. And he does this by, he shows his insolence by bringing Aegon II on Mouse, the ship named for his mother. And it's a small ship, not the state galley, not a big fancy warship. So it was done as an insult, definitely. But very soon after all this, the Sea Snake switches sides again in the name of peace. This is when Cregan Stark comes up, and Aegon II turns up dead of poison, also in the name of peace, as we covered last week. So again, Alyn's presence and the threat of the Valyrian fleet is cited as a reason that the Sea Snake is allowed to live, meaning that Cregan allows him to live. But of course, as we detailed last week, Black Alley Blackwood probably had the most to do with that. But Aegon III also pardoned the Sea Snake, and we know that, unlike, say, Unwin Peak, Cregan actually listened to Aegon III's underage decrees, at least most of the time. So Alyn's men, who are probably feeling like some sort of boomerang at this point, they're just back and forth like, we're blacks, we're greens, we're blacks again. Wait, there are no blacks or greens, but who are our enemies? So now these guys who had just picked up a passenger at Dragonstone and dropped him off are now returning to it to attack it, to clear out the remaining loyalists of Aegon II. Soon after, Aegon III ascends, and boom, we've got a coronation for Aegon III, and Alyn is there for the coronation, along with his, who I've written in the notes, his father-grandfather, Corlys. A couple of super chats here let me get to before we continue the story. From Fred Targaryen's Uncle Daddy. Just want to throw some support your way. Too lazy to go through the whole Patreon process. Well, thanks. We appreciate it. Any way you want to do your support. Money is money. It doesn't have to come through Patreon, right? We have a donation button on our website as well. And of course, these super chats get to us. So yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you, Fred Targaryen's Uncle Daddy. And LML says, how many Nenny moans could an anemone moan if anemones could moan an anemone? That's a good one too. Of course, the standard 666 super chat from LML and company. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that. New Hand of the King, Tywin Lannister, commissions 50 new galleys, perhaps to end the dependency on House Velaryon and prevent them from having such power in Blackwater Bay. So not only are the Velaryons such a powerhouse at sea, which, again, wasn't as big a problem as recently as a couple years prior because of the presence of dragons. But now, this is a new Westeros, and military power takes a different form. The hierarchy is different in that regard. Also, think it's important to mention that because the Hightowers and Lannisters were second fiddle to Valyrian wealth, although maybe not at this point because of the loss of High Tide, maybe that's a bit of the undertone here as well, that a little bit of, hey, the Lannisters, just like the Baratheons and some other houses, kind of wanted to unseat the Valyrians as the number 2 house in Westeros. And anything to take power away from House Velaryon is going to be towards that goal. We also have the first appearance of Racalio Rendoon, who betrays the Triarchy and starts being the pirate king that he is, and by taking part of the Stepstones. Now that's going to become a really big factor in this coming up for Alyn, because he's going to have to deal with Rindoon multiple times, as is a lot of Westeros, as is a lot of the Free Cities. He becomes pretty darn important. Let's take a second here and talk about some of the parallels from the Parallel Lives standpoint. Early on, you see some of the parallels to Davos, the stuff with Aurane Waters and Daemon Targaryen. You see only a little of to this point. With Daemon, you get some of the insolence and the kind of being who he wants to be and the aggressiveness, and obviously dealing with the Stepstones, spending a lot of time fighting pirates and wars in the Stepstones. With Aurane Waters, well, Aurane Waters is a Velaryon, and he was a bastard, and he's ambitious, and he's changed his sides a few times, so there you go. And with Davos, it's more of the kind of always treated badly by nobility, but always does a great job. Kind of in terms of merit, he's great, but always kind of insulted and pushed aside or just not listened to because of his bastardy. And that is a very common theme with Alyn going forward. We're going to see him constantly insulted, pushed back on, and set aside, despite most people in his position, like, say, Paxter Redwine or some of these other guys who control huge fleets. People are always deferring to them and taking, being very wary of their power. But it's not the way Alyn is treated in a lot of cases by some people. Some people are wisely wary of his power, but a lot of them treat him as if he's a nobody, which is so strange because he's so not a nobody. He's very powerful. Okay. Let's see, where was I? We're at pretty soon after things break out in the Narrow Sea. Things are going on still in King's Landing. There's a lot happening there with the Regency and the Hour of the Wolf, of course, which we covered last week. The Sea Snake dies pretty early in all this at age 79. He's in the year 132, early 132, and the dance ended in 131. So again, he wasn't around all that long for the aftermath, even though his role was very crucial. So Alyn and his mother, Merilda Mouse, bring him back to Driftmark in state on a ship called Maiden's Kiss, which is, I guess, one of their biggest, most fancy ships. And he immediately claims the lordship because, of course, he is. He's the heir. It's not. It shouldn't really be a matter of dispute, but this is Driftmark. We're talking about an incredibly powerful castle, and there's other Velaryons out there. And here's where we remember that incident a while back when Sir Vaemond, went to King Viserys and said, "Hey, I should have Driftmark. All those kids are Strongs." And of course, what he got for that was his tongue pulled out. Well, I'm sorry. He didn't get his tongue pulled out. His descendants got their tongues pulled out. He got killed and burned fed to Syrax. But his descendants were still around. Some of them who still didn't have their tongues, including one named Sir Malentine and another named Sir Rogar. I believe both of them were tongueless. They tried to assassinate Alyn, but they failed. Malentine was killed. Rogar was captured. He took the black. So Alyn, I guess, defended himself. He probably fought off some of these guys. Hey, small and quick, right? That might be a factor here. Not that he has anything really all that in common with Shadrick, the Mad Mouse, but it's hard to not think of small and quick dude and the word mouse and not think of him. But hey, chatters, y'all check that out. Maybe there's more parallels than I think. You've got he's trying to capture Sansa, whereas Oakenfist is the guy that rescues another long lost heir, hidden heir in Viserys. Maybe there's more to it. Y'all work on that for me while I continue here. That might be something, might be nothing. Other Velaryon's cousins, Damian and Daeron, are reconciled with Alyn rather than continuing to contest this claim. And they get a deal. They get lands on Driftmark. They get, lower level, lord level deals, I suppose you'd call that. So they get some land, they get some income, enough land to build ships on, because part of the deal is they're ordered to provide ships to the Velaryon fleet. So clearly they're getting a decent deal here. Now, Daeron's an interesting character because he is going to be the father of Daenerys, who becomes the queen and gives birth to the 3 princesses in the tower, and Baelor the Blessed, and very relevantly, the young dragon, Daeron the First, who Alyn Oakenfist has a long career, an important part of his career working with. And he also, even probably as important, is his relationship to one of the 3 princesses in the tower, Elena. He has an affair with her, and yeah, so that's pretty huge. This family connection stays pretty strong here. But this is all of this, and he's not even 16 yet, Alyn Velaryon. Wow, right? So at this point, he now is 16, a little while after this succession issue for Driftmark. He, ambitious, proud, sails right into King's Landing and says, hey, Corlys Velaryon, my grandfather, I don't know what term he used. He probably had to say the official line of grandfather, was on the small council, and I should get his seat. Well, our modern sensibilities are like, that is so wrong. These are not hereditary posts. You shouldn't be passing down government posts to your descendants. But we all know that is how it works in Westeros quite often. That's quite normal for a seat given to a family member being sort of held for that family if that family member dies. For example, Oberyn just showed up to claim his brother's seat on the small council that was given to him, and now they're just kind of passing that off to which one? Tyene, I believe. So it is hereditary. These things are hereditary. They shouldn't be probably, but they clearly are. So, but they're like, no. The Lannister, Tywin Lannister, maybe again as a kind of slight power play here, says, no, you're too young. And Unwin Peak is selected instead. Oops. That was not a good play. And so the Council of Regents does the kind of stuff they always do, which is do their governing, and a big part of their governing is making marriages. And making marriages is always a big thing during aftermath, after a big old civil war. Part of the healing process is binding up the wounds with marriages. One of these marriages they decide is Baela, as in Baela, who rode Moondancer and helped finish off Sunfire and badly hurt Aegon II even more. That Baela was going to be married off to Thaddeus Rowan. Thaddeus Rowan, decent dude, but 40 years older than her and not ideal at all. So she pulls an Alysanne and runs off and goes to Alyn Velaryon himself and says, hey, they're trying to marry me to Rowan. You're my cousin. And hey, this is wrong. And from Alyn's point of view, there's a lot to like here. One, if he has a son with Baela, that kid would be Aegon III's heir until Aegon had his own son. And we know this because that's what they were saying about Thaddeus and Baela. They were saying, hey, if Thaddeus and Baela have a son, that kid's the heir to Aegon until he has his own kid. And Aegon, again, is still really young at this point, so he's not going to have kids anytime soon. So that's an obvious angle for Alyn to be like, ooh, that's a good way. That's ambition right there. That's a good way to get closer to the throne. But there's even more here, which is that Baela's a hot princess. That's exactly his age, basically. Like, they're within a year of each other, and he's a martial type brave badass, and so is she. So relationships aren't that simple, but you can see how they could have gotten along. And later on they would fight a lot, but they always seem to make up. So, two fiery people. But here's where one of these insults come. They look down on Alyn as someone who had, quote, a snake for a sire, a mouse for a mother. Is this to be our prince consort? And they're basically like, they really do not like the idea that Baela's kid could be the heir. They really don't like that because of all the stuff I just said about her. They didn't like her that much, to be honest. And they definitely didn't like Alyn that much either. So this is a lot of insulting of him and more of their thoughts on bastardy. Calling him upjumped and all that. Now, Aegon III is friendly with Alyn. He likes him. He's like a lot of people, doesn't think of this in terms of too much in terms of politics. he's a good guy to have on your side, and so he tries to appoint him as Lord Admiral / Master of Ships. Remember, at this point, that title was kind of both. It was both Lord Admiral and Master of Ships. But the council undoes all those appointments because they're like, nope, Aegon III, you're too young, you don't get to make appointments yet. So, no, they're not like Cregan Stark at all. They go against him on just about everything. But to assuage the people that Aegon III had named to different positions, they give those guys other jobs instead. So they say, hey, you offered this guy a job? Well, sorry, Aegon III, that's not going to happen. But we're going to give him a job anyway, so he's not too unhappy. Except Alyn. They don't give him anything. He was offered Master of Ships by the king, and the council says, no, that doesn't count. Instead, it goes to Gedmund Peak, who is not even a sailor and is clearly related to the new power player, Mr. Unwin Peak. Mr.? Yeah, Mr. We'll go with Mr., not Lord. And here's where there's another Orain Waters vibe coming up here. A Lannister orders the building of 10 new warships, exactly what Cersei did in A Feast for Crows. And when they were finished, Orain ran off with them. And, well, we don't know what happened to these 10 warships specifically, but it's part of the fleet that gets added here to deal with all this stuff that's happening in the Narrow Sea, which is the Triarchy and Recalio Rendoon. And the point is, we don't have to get into all the reasons those groups are fighting. The point is that it messes trade up badly, both from the pirate activity attacking ships and the less piratical, more tyrannical high taxes being charged on any ship that passes through. That's kind of what they're fighting over, the right to charge tolls through the stepstones. It's all about money. That's it, money and power, as usual. Super chat from Anthony Morales. I don't see a comment or question, so thank you very much, Anthony, for the contribution. Not long after this is when Oakenfist becomes Oakenfist. The situation is that Pentos controls part of the Stepstones, Rendoon the rest, Braavos the seas north of that. And do we have a map shot for that?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, awesome. So we can see, kind of help you see this visually to kind of imagine what's happening here. Now, the way this plays out is the Valyrian fleet is added to this war fleet. It's a big one. He has 200 just himself. So I'm not really sure. Either it's not listed or I didn't figure out how many ships it was, but Alyn alone brought 200. This is a really big fleet. And there's a great quote here. He doesn't like the idea of giving command over, and what happens is Ned Bean, who is an experienced sailor at least, is sent over to deal with, to take over the Valyrian fleets, and Alyn says, no. They are my fleets now, and Bela's monkey is more suited to command them than Uncle Gedmund. That's what he says when the announcement is made. But when Ned Bean comes over to take command, he sends him back and says, I would have hanged him, but I am loath to waste good hempen rope on a bean. Another of his kind of salty quotes, salty being a pretty perfect one for a sailor. But I like that line a lot, waste good hempen rope on a bean. Let's take 2 minutes here to talk about Ned Bean. I think it's hilarious. I posted this on Twitter yesterday, that a character named Ned Bean, who obviously reminds us simultaneously of Ned Stark and Sean Bean, who's, kind of the same guy. And this Ned Bean character does not die during this story at all. There's not even like a hint that he died. He just kind of enters the story and then kind of fades away. Maybe he'll die in Fire and Blood too. So we can hope that this injustice, this wrong can be righted, because it's just way too unrealistic that a guy named Ned Bean isn't killed, right? Come on. Who are we dealing with here? Okay, we're about the halfway point, so I'm going to do our mid-roll business real quick, and we'll come back to how Alyn earned his name of Oakenfist and the continuing adventures of him. All right, so yes, thank you to our other Patreon supporters who get mid-roll shout-outs. We do have shout-outs for various levels of contribution that depend on the amount and the choice that you make with your donations. And for this time, let's see, what do I have here? There they are. We have our Blood Rider patrons, of course, who are Vorsaki, wielder of a Valyrian steel arak with a dragonbone hilt. Kohal Cully, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a dragonbone bow. And Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the Wildfire Whip Gehenna. Blood Riders get multiple votes towards the next episode, which episode voting will be underway shortly because, as I said earlier, Blood Raven 3 is in production. And they also get episodes early, 7 days early that is, and of course these mid-roll shout-outs. Also going to shout out our Ironborn captains, who are also get an episode shout-out approximately every third episode. And they also get episodes early and some other cool bonuses. Check out all the detail at patreon.com. What is up with me today? Patreon.com/History of Westeros. And those Ironborn captains are Black Matto Stormrider, captain of the Rusted Hinge. Oisan the Wanderer, captain of Naga's Living Flame. Sir Selvus Redblade of White Harbor, captain of Trident of the North. Lord Chucklaws, captain of the Droman Nightblood, destroyer of evil. John Gregor, captain of the Fist of the Drowned God. Sir Kiron of Lonely Light, Scourge of the Sunset Sea, captain of Naga's Breath, a Dromund armed with siphons of wildfire. Aileen, Archer Queen, captain of the Border Collie. Crimson Kate, captain of the Drowned Queen's Vengeance. Jasana the Just, collector of tolls, captain of the Golden Gift. Lord Mitch of House Bailey, captain of Widow's Blood. His heir is Lordling Mason of House Bailey. Beneath the Gold, a podcast focusing on lesser-known Song of Ice and Fire characters, which I would think is something that fans of our show would be very into. And Phantom of House Physics, the Sunset King, Plato Oplomo, captain of Leviathan's Banshee. That's a first shout-out for Phantom there. And I would also like to recommend to y'all that you have the ability to get 2 free downloads from audible.com. Go to historyofwesteros.com and click on the Audible sidebar there, and you can get those 2 free downloads from them. And if you don't decide to go ahead with the trial, well, you get to keep those 2 free downloads. I believe Fire and Blood is available. If not, there's so many other good books, ones we recommended. You could always go back and get Game of Thrones or The World of Ice and Fire and listen there. You could listen to The Sworn Sword or any of the other Hedge Knight novels. You could listen to non-Song of Ice and Fire stuff. We've recommended books like The Expanse and The Last Kingdom. And there's plenty of others that are escaping me at the moment. But lots of good books out there that are maybe a little... It's easier to find time to listen to books while you're doing chores and driving than it is to find time to read. So, that is my recommendation. Go to historyofwesteros.com, take advantage of that trial, and see if it's for you. All right, let's get back to it. Just a couple of announcements there. We do have a question here. Looks like from Scott Alexander Wortman. It is... No, that's not from him. That's from somebody else. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, this question is from Broken King. No. Excuse me. No?
Maybe you're not reading it. I'll just tell you. Thomas Pappas is super...
No, I see that. But is Broken King is a separate question, yeah? Yes. That's what I was correcting. Okay, yes. Broken King is a separate question. Zeus, do you believe that Aurane will ally with Phagon? Good question. I think that is a distinct possibility, but I think he may end up with Daenerys because Aurane seems very clearly to be a man who just wants to rise high. He does not care who it's with. He was with Stannis because his house was with Stannis, but when the Valyrians stayed with Stannis, he went and bent the knee to the Lannisters, saying, hey, name me Lord of Driftmark and I will serve you. And that's a standard power play. You got a house that's on one side, whereas a member of that house joins the other side with the promise that, hey, I'll help you guys if I get to take over that house if we all win. And so that's what Aurane seems to be doing here. But, of course, he didn't stick to that plan. He stole the Lannister ships first chance he got and sailed them off to the Stepstones. And we don't know what he's doing next. But, yeah, I don't think he's just going to vanish and not become a part of Westerosi politics. He still wants to rise high. And he's clearly abandoned the Lannisters because they were having all kinds of problems with Cersei's walk and everything else. So that makes more sense, I think, that he will blow with the wind like any good sailor, right? And I think he'll probably end up with whoever's winning, unless Dany just doesn't want him, which is possible. But Since the Velaryons are still on Stannis' side, I could see Dany accepting him, especially because, well, he's charming, he's handsome, and if he has 10 big warships, well, yeah, that's a good reason to be taken seriously. And Dany's going to have to pass by the Stepstones whenever she comes to Westeros, especially if she goes to Dragonstone. And even if she goes to Dorne, she'll be passing by the Stepstones. There's pretty much no way for her to land in Westeros without at least passing the Stepstones, if not passing through them. So that's going to come up. Now, let's see, where were we? Yeah, the incident where he gets his name. So what we were talking about is all this constant shifting of alliances between these powers in the Narrow Sea. As Gedmund, Peake, and Ned Bean and Alyn Velaryon reach Tarth, they hang out there for a minute and regroup, and discover that the political situation has changed dramatically. Pentos is now out of the deal, Tyrosh has entered the deal, and Rindun and Braavos have agreed to rule the Stepstones kind of together instead of fighting over it. So a pretty huge change in the political landscape. And so Gedmund, taking the longer term route, decides to write King's Landing and say, hey, the political situation has changed. What should we do now? Are we still going after Rindun, or are we doing something different? Alyn is not into this. He doesn't like waiting. He wants to take the element of surprise. And so he does. He just does it on his own. He's like, yeah, I'm going to attack. I got 200 ships. Let's do this. But the weird thing is he attacks the Braavosi, which he had to have something in mind here. I mean, if they're controlling the Narrow Sea and he's House Velaryon, I think this is more of his ambition. But it was clearly not what the Iron Throne wanted. When he returns victorious to cheering crowds, because everyone loves a winner, and he was quite a winner, people love him. And so that makes it hard to go against him politically when you're that popular. Now, the actual incident when he gets his name, I don't want to skip over that. As they're bashing the Braavosi, who were totally taken by surprise, one particularly large Braavosi ship called the Grand Defiance, which is a dromond itself, 400 oars, a big, big ship, escapes kind of the press of ships, only to find that Queen Rhaenys, Oakenfist's ship at the time, was kind of waiting for it, or waiting for something like that, and he gets full steam ahead, well, speed ahead, no steam power yet, and rams the broadside of the Grand Defiance with their big Oaken Fist, a big Oaken ram, and sinks it. Just, that's that. Crushes this big, huge warship, and it's kind of sort of how the whole battle went for the Braavosi. They only killed like 3 enemy ships and lost, half of theirs, several of which were captured. So Oakenfist came out ahead. Even though he lost 3 ships, he captured more than that, and lots of loot and hostages and an elephant. The elephant, which gives us another of his insolent moments where Peake is just yelling at him for attacking the Braavosi and bringing war to King's Landing against the Braavosi, who are such a mighty naval power. And he just kind of smarmy about it. He says, don't forget the elephant. And so Peake, being a clever man, has his own way of playing this situation. How do you handle a really brave, popular hero who's kind of messing up your plans for everything? Well, we like Oakenfist. I mean, I think most of us do. We certainly like him more than Unwin Peake. That's not a tough sell, I think. But from Peake's point of view, I think he handles this kind of cleverly. It doesn't really work out for him, but it's a pretty smooth move. You gotta give it to Peake. He's good at being bad. So one little side note before Peake, though, the one real loss besides those 3 ships, which were made good by capturing others, is that he lost that cousin Daeron, the one who's the father of Daenerys. And this brings him close to Daenerys because Daeron's wife, the mother of Daenerys, is also dead by this point. So young Daenerys is fostered with the Velaryons, especially with Bela, because Alyn, he's always out doing other stuff. But he knew her. And that's important. That's going to come up pretty big. So now he is sort of named Master of Ships again, but it's sort of temporary. and it's also one of these poisoned gifts. It's kind of like Euron. Unwin's being like Euron here. The gift of Master of Ships here comes with a mission. And that mission is a tough one. A really tough one. It turns out to be the first of 6 of Alyn's great voyages. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what we know about the other voyages later, which is sad to say, except for the first and second, we know very little about them, and we don't even know that much about the second one. But we do have some clues and some guesses, but we'll get to that. So this is 133, roughly a year after the war is over, but also Corlys is dead by this point. Of course, he was dead by 132. We don't know how many kids Bela and Alyn had, and George just says many. But the first one is Elena, a girl named Lena. We do know that Oakenfist wanted a boy named Corlys. And since he got many kids, I assume one of them was a boy, so it was probably a Corlys. But we don't actually know that for sure. Maybe he had all girls. It's possible. And he has to sail. The plan is he has to sail all the way from King's Landing / Driftmark all the way to the Iron Islands, which, the TV show makes that look really easy, but but it's not. Dorne is a really difficult place to sail around, and it's perilous just for that part. And of course, the more perilous part is facing the Ironborn at sea. So he's cautious on the way. He kind of behaves a little differently. Maybe he's learned a few things. Maybe he's wary. Maybe he knows that Unwin is setting him up a little bit here. But mostly it's just he knows what's going on. He knows Rendoon still has all this power in the Stepstones, and there's a lot he also has to preserve his strength, because if he gets into these fights ahead of time before facing the Red Kraken, well, that's already a tough order to beat the Red Kraken, so he needs to be at full strength when he gets there. So it's very important for him to not get into battles or into situations that cause him to lose strength while he's on the way. So that's his first stop, basically. Rendoon is a really fascinating character, and since he doesn't want to fight, he sails in by himself on just his ship and says, hey, let's talk. And he ends up staying there for like a fortnight, so pretty good length of time. You wonder what his captains were doing back on their ships, like, should we be worried yet? What's going on? Because Rendoon's a tricky guy, and also maybe mad. I'd love to spend more time talking about him, but we probably don't have a whole lot of time to do that. But I will at least say he has vibes of Dario and Euron and other characters that are just really out there. He cross-dresses. He's got uncertain origin. He's an incredible warrior. He believes in all the gods. He dyes his beard purple and orange. Just a really interesting character, and very different one day to the next. Not very consistent guy, except for consistently ambitious and weird. So the final deal is also weird. 3 ships, an alliance written in blood on sheepskin, and a kiss, which was arranged differently. I don't know if Rendoon was wanting a kiss from Alyn or from somebody, but the actual deal settled on was that if he ever came to Driftmark, he would get a kiss from Lady Bela. And this was after Rendoon wanted Alyn to impregnate multiple of his wives, which is kind of weird, but on the other hand, it might be a matter of ambition. If Rendoon has a boy with Alyn's blood, he could come claim Driftmark with that, potentially. And this is a pirate king, so you don't want to give pirate kings claims to your lands, even indirectly like that. So I think this is maybe a bit even more cleverness on Rendoon's part, because we know that Alyn was promiscuous. He had all these lovers, and he was handsome, so a lot of women got his attention, even if he wasn't necessarily sleeping with them. He was getting noticed by a lot of women, getting lots of attention. So Rendoon may have heard of this reputation and thought this was a good way to, get him to slip up. But it doesn't seem likely that it happened. We don't know that it did. We certainly don't know that it didn't either. And so he moves on from there. after that alliance is in place. And stops in Dorne next, where he meets Alejandra Martell, who is considered the new Nymeria. We talked about her a bit in our Nymeria series. And she's one of the people into him. And kind of like the inverse here happens, where they sail up with so many ships that Dorne is alarmed. And like, uh-oh, why are all these ships here? But they have no ability to fight them. So they may as well greet them friendly and say, hey, what's up, friends? And that is how it goes, because, of course, we do know that Alyn Velaryon had no military designs on Dorne, and in part because Alejandra and Alyn get along so well and maybe sleep together, but that's disputed by a lot. Regardless of whether they did, it definitely pissed off her suitors, of which she had many. And they get food and water and go on their way. On the way to the High Tower, we have a little more art from the Fire and Blood, where we have Alyn's ships facing a storm west of Salt Shore, and Deshay is putting that up, or already has it up. And this is nothing too interesting about that. Storms are always bad, but it's proof of what I was saying, that it's no small thing to sail around Dorne. And I guess they didn't face whirlpools. Actually, I think Alejandra gives them a map to show them how to avoid the whirlpools. So just imagine how difficult it would have been if they didn't have this whirlpool map to help them avoid. So then he gets to Old Town and gets to the High Tower. He's greeted by Lord Lionel very pleasantly. And this is good because this is, the High Tower is the spot of the main power base for the Greens, which, that's all died down, but it's not completely died down. And he gets along really well with Lady Samantha, the one who rode in on the horse to the High Sept there, she's really cool. And he gets along well with her. We can see why. They both have these kind of similar personalities, perhaps. So all this goes a long way towards settling some of these old grievances between blacks and greens, seeing these important figures get along. This is also where he hears the news about the Maiden's Day Ball. So in other words, he hears that Daenerys, his ward, is going to marry the king. So that's good news for him, and good news for his wife, because he's almost certainly aware that his wife and his wife's sister Rhaena are the ones that presented Daenerys to the king. And while he's at the High Tower, he gets the promise of more naval strength, which is great news also. 20 ships from the High Tower, 30 more for the Arbor. And while he's waiting for them to be outfitted and crewed and all that, he goes to the Citadel, which is, of course, what all of us would do. Check out those old books, old naval battles about ships, Valyrian books, scrolls, things like that, which I figure has got to be some of the same books Alyssa Farman studied earlier, which I think is really cool. That's kind of like, it fits into the parallels, I guess you could say, but it's just, they're following each other's footsteps. And I guess some of these books he may have heard about from his father as well, maybe specific books that Corlys had mentioned. So that's just really cool. I love all that. I love these. I love the book connections like that. And he goes north after a little while. He is impatient again. Doesn't wait for the Arbor fleets to show up. They're taking too long. And he says, we're fine. We got enough ships. He sails off with the High Tower ships. And then gets even more ships from the Shield Islands, which is cool. The Shield Islands are, of course, all about fighting the Ironborn. They're like, they would not have it said that someone attacked the Ironborn and that they weren't a part of it. They have been defending against the Ironborn for millennia. But again, right after this, another storm hits and some more damage is done. But none of this matters because Dalton Greyjoy is killed by a woman named Tess, who we know very little about, just in bed. He was asleep. She did the thing that Ygritte says. When Jon's like, well, what if you have a husband that's beat you? And she says, well, then I'll cut his throat at night, And so, well, that's what happened here. It's easier said than done, but it can be done, and it was done here. So, unfortunately, she kills herself because she knows that being caught having done this, she would be tortured to death, probably not just something as relatively painless like jumping out a window, comparatively. So he just goes to Lannisport and meets up with the Lannisters and hangs out there a bit. And goes back to the High Tower, and on the way runs into that late red wine fleet. But they hang out, they have a meal together, and it's all cool. That no one's mad, at least not to a point that is recorded. He goes back around, apparently less trouble sailing around Dorne this time, and goes back to hang out with Alejandra a bit, and that upsets her suitors again, and more rumors fly. But, of course, part of the reason he had to stop there was to resupply. But while there, a huge moment, he meets Drazenko Rogare. Now, half of this works out really well. The other half doesn't. The half that doesn't work out is that the Rogare Bank becomes a big deal, and they become friendly with the Velaryons, and of course the Rogare Bank goes under, and the Velaryons lose a ton of wealth. But that's coming up a little bit later. For now, the part that works out well is that the way it's presented in Fire and Blood, it's kind of it builds the suspense a bit. If you were really on top of your game while reading it, you knew what was going on, because we already know from the World of Ice and Fire that Oakenfist brings back Viserys. Actually, I don't know if we knew it was Oakenfist, but we knew that Viserys was recovered around this time. And so again, Oakenfist gets to be the hero. A double hero in this case. He sails around to deal with the Red Kraken, even though he didn't fight a single battle, not a single ship engagement. It was just the danger of sailing, which is, not to be despised. He's still treated like a hero, even though he didn't actually beat the guy. The guy was just killed. Unwin Peak at this point is paranoid that he's so popular. Oakenfist is so popular that he's going to take his job as hand. And Peak's fears are somewhat realized when he returns, and there's this really big crowd moment, like this big happy moment where people are cheering. He shows up, sails into the harbor, steps off the ship, probably got this big smile on his face, looking all fancy and successful, and his wife meets him on the dock and hands him their kid, who he hadn't met yet. This is Lena, the daughter. He hadn't met her yet, so he gets to hold her above the crowd, and the crowd yells. And then he kneels to the king and queen, which I guess he hadn't done yet, or at least maybe he had, but he was kind of renewing his fealty, whatever. The standard kneeling before the king that everyone does. But then he just really nails the moment, the way he kind of leads the crowd along and drops this surprise on their heads. Unwin Peak tries to kind of undo it. He's just so impatient. He's like, who is it? Who's that person in the hood? And he just rushes up, and it's just kind of funny, the scene. But it turns out to be young Viserys, which Aegon III had so much guilt over leaving Viserys during the Battle of the Gullet. And it was a big part of his trauma, which is a big part of his character. So, wow, is this a big win for Alyn, not just for the crowd, but now the king is like, man, you brought back my brother, my long lost brother. I thank you for that. That's who he's got. He's the main person he has to thank for it. So another kind of bad thing about this, and it feeds into the whole Rogare Bank deal, is that Oakenfist is not great with money, potentially. Maybe we're making too much of this one example, but his negotiations with the Rogares for the release of Viserys involved him giving up a ton of value, just an insane amount of wealth to get this back, or to get him back. And maybe they were partly charging for Viserys' egg, because Viserys had a dragon egg with him, and we know those are worth a ton. So I'm guessing the ransom included the value of that dragon egg. But, however, this didn't prove to be a big problem for the Iron Throne. It did prove to be a big problem for Alyn personally. But because the Rogares went belly up, the Iron Throne was able to say, oh, well, our ransom deal was with them, not with the city of Lys. So we don't have to pay. So this ruinous ransom never became ruinous because it wasn't paid. And so all these reasons, all this popularity, right? Because he's this hero of defeating the Red Kraken and dealing with Rindoon, even though he didn't defeat him, but he still met him. And I'm sure there's all these stories being told about him, all these rumors and gossip, and then sailed to meet with Alejandra. Just all these people he's dealing with, all these important people he's talking to who all seem to like him. You can see why his incredibly popular. Plus, he's young and handsome and really rich, and he's married to a princess. Unwin didn't really have that much to worry about, but you can see why he did. If you put yourself in his position, which is awkward because no one wants to be like Unwin for a minute. But if we do that, it's like, I can see why he was worried. This guy is incredibly popular, incredibly successful, and his star just keeps rising. But it wasn't all good. We have the incident where, like the Targaryens did, we see maybe a bit of encroachment there where Alyn and Bela give an egg to Laena, their daughter, who is a Velaryon, not a Targaryen. And well, maybe the gods were listening. Maybe this was this effrontery was noticed, because this is that incident where the egg hatches and it's a blind, monstrous hatchling that immediately rips a chunk of flesh from baby Laena's arm. And luckily Alyn was there, and he grabbed it and killed it really quickly. So, yikes! Like, what was that about? Is this something to do with the drop off of magic that is related to the dragons dying, or is similarly timed with the dragons dying out? And maybe that's affecting dragon bursts, or this is just some strange defect in this particular dragon egg. A lot of possibilities there. And of course, all his closeness with the Rogares, dealing with this, giving them such a great deal and just dealing with them at all, and all their gains of power, widely suspected that he's just too close with them. Another thing that Peake is paranoid about, and other people as well. And although it's not really a problem, maybe they had reason to believe it was at the time. On the other hand, Merilda, his mother, builds the Mouse House, which is a really hilarious name, but especially because it makes it sound like it's small and petty, but it's a nickname given to it by Mushroom. It's actually like a fancy mansion. And Merilda also expands the trading fleet, and Alyn is presumably involved in his decisions and in helping, and they work together a lot. So you can imagine that this was a joint venture in a lot of ways, with her just kind of taking charge and the Velaryon wealth maybe supporting it in some way. But again, she had a lot of her own money, so it's entirely possible that Oakenfist wasn't much involved in that. And we have more on the Rogares, which is that the incident of the secret siege, where Aegon III is trapped inside the Red Keep with Viserys and Lara Rogari and Sandok the Shadow and all these other interesting characters, including Daenerys herself. And the false confession from Thaddeus Rowan implicates Oakenfist as one of the conspirators. But then we have the incident that we'll get to talk about in another week or so. Well, maybe not next week. Whatever. In a few weeks, at some point before we finish our Fire and Blood coverage, we're certainly going to talk about Aegon III in more detail. Viserys figures this out. He realizes that this is a false confession. He asks more leading questions that proves that the confession was fake. And all this happens. Basically, and Alyn isn't aware of any of this, at least not directly. He's not there for this, because all this time, he is being busy doing the kind of things that a normal master of ships would, even though he's not actually the master of ships. He was named it briefly, but again, the job is given to Gedmund. Gedmund Greataxe, the guy who got sick sailing around, a guy with very little naval experience, although he has a little more naval experience by now. However, this time, Alyn's not mad. We don't know why. Maybe he's just like, you know what? I don't like playing politics anyway. All that stuff, I didn't like being on the small council. I didn't like my little bit of time dealing with court figures. I don't like having to be around Unwin Peak. He prefers to be in action. He prefers to be sailing ships. He prefers to be going on voyages. He prefers to any of this, almost anything to that. So I can kind of maybe see a little growth in him that way. That he kind of, his ambitions were more aimed towards things that he was more interested in and less towards politics. And he's already such a powerful guy politically anyway. So we have civil war in the Vale, and this is what he was busy doing. His fleet takes Gulltown's harbor and doesn't seem to have a whole lot of trouble with it, although it gets a little more difficult on land. But he's able to wear down the opposition gradually, and the war drags on for a while. But he's able to do his thing and gets yet more success under his belt. Another engagement successful. another war that he's involved with where he's on the winning side, and he's a big part of that. So his reputation just continues to grow even greater. And he returns to King's Landing to find that, yeah, he is... this is when he's passed over again for Master Ships, and he's also up for Hand, but still too young, is what he's deemed. But I gotta say, Tywin was about this age when he became Hand, and Viserys, who Alyn just rescued, also becomes Hand at a similar age. In fact, not long from now. I believe maybe like 5 or 6 more years. So, but showing his, even though I was saying he's maybe not super interested in politics, or perhaps prefers to be elsewhere, he does still show some political savvy. He suggests that Isambard Arryn, who is one of the men he was on the opposite side of in this Vale conflict, be the new Master of Coin. Because, well, I don't know exactly why, but Isambard was a good candidate for being Master of Coin, a person who was good with money. So that's cool. I can respect Velaryon for recognizing that this person was good for the realm, even though it was so recently his enemy. So we're mostly we're almost to the point where Fire and Blood ends and there's no more coverage of Oakenfist. So most of what's coming up here at the end is post Fire and Blood, but some of it still is, especially this Rogara stuff that we're going to deal with just for just a minute before we move on to the bigger things. So the second voyage, again, I said he has 6 voyages. And an interesting thing about that, before we describe the second voyage, let's just say he went on 6 voyages, 6 different ships, which is cool, but I wonder why. I wonder if it's maybe some of the earlier ones were destroyed, maybe he just kept improving his designs, maybe it was based on where he was going. For example, his father sailed the Ice Wolf to the north and tried to find a passage in the ice there. But then he had his Sea Snake, which he sailed in the south. So that's a little, that's possibly what's up. And Oakenfist called his 6 ships My Ladies, which implies that they were all his ships, and he didn't sail the Sea Snake or the Ice Wolf. The Ice Wolf, maybe the Sea Snake was a female name for a ship. I don't really know. That's not really a gendered name. But Ice Wolf, I don't know. That sounds kind of masculine, but it could be a woman. There's nothing to prevent it from being a female name ship. And ships are very often ladies. That's pretty normal. So anyway, brief aside there to think about about his ships, but we just honestly don't know a whole lot about them. So because of this huge, because of the Rogari collapse, which we're not going into detail on, just saying that it happened, and a ton of people lost a ton of money, and that the Iron Bank was very much involved, and that the Faceless Men were very much involved, probably. The collapse meant half of the Velaryon wealth was lost, which, of course, considering how wealthy they were, that is an unfathomable sum. So they tried to, make some of that back. Alyn's idea was, let's do another trading voyage. We'll sail to all these free cities, culminating in Volantis, but also including Lys and other places. And this apparently I think this involved his mother going as well. And Bela, was pregnant at the time, and is angry that he would leave during her pregnancy, because he wasn't there for her last pregnancy either. And she's also a bit angry that he's planning on returning to Dorne as part of this voyage because, well, the rumors about Alejandra and all that. So there's a little bit of worry that he's going to cheat again and all that. But apparently they make up again later. So apparently this is the voyage. We don't know. We don't have any details on it. They do the trading circle to Volantis, go to Dorne and Lys and Pentos. And I guess it goes pretty well. Later in life, we're told that he battles pirates from the Stepstones in the Narrow Sea. That might be his third voyage. That might be further engagement with Ricalio Rendoon. Rendoon's another one of these characters who is still alive as of the end of Fire and Blood, so we have no idea what happens. Super chat from Rebecca Santos saying for the 6 ships of Oakenfist. Whoa, that one turned into a tongue twister accidentally. So it was a $6 super chat for 6 ships of Oakenfist. Very good. Thank you, Rebecca. Unsurprisingly, because he's such a popular, successful winner, he had a lot of books written about him. A lot of these books are mentioned throughout Fire and Blood. Bastard Born is one of them. Hard as Oak is one of them. And but we don't get a lot of details as to what's in them. In one of them, we hear that the book is written by a guy who went on the 5th voyage with him. But that's all the detail we have on the 5th voyage, that this guy, Russell Stillwell, Esquire, was on the voyage with him. That's all we know. We know even less about the others. The 6th voyage might be the one he didn't return from. But we don't even know that because... this is one of those things where George just tells us he vanishes in 175. There's no context. We don't know whether he was with other ships. We don't even know when the expedition left. It could have been as early as maybe 171. Probably not, but 172, 173, 74, in that range, as late as 175. And were there other ships with him? Did anyone else return? Probably not, because there's so little detail. But I feel like this is one of those things like George doesn't want to write himself into a corner, doesn't want to decide right now. He wants to let more, since Oakenfist is a character that's going to be in Fire and Blood too, he doesn't want to make all these decisions and be bound to them later. So he leaves it intentionally vague, not unlike how the 3rd Blackfire Rebellion is left in The World of Ice and Fire, and several other stories where George or Maekar's Reign is another one where there's just a surprise, like a notable lack of detail. And it's because George is saving that. He's got plans for that, but he doesn't know what they are yet, or didn't want to spend time on it right at that point because, he's got other things to write. So I feel pretty strongly about that. Whenever George leaves something vague like that, especially about a character this popular and famous, there's a reason to think of it on the meta level and not on the in-world level. So other potential things that are relevant to him before we get to the conquest of Dorne, which is the main other thing we know about. At some point, a deal was worked out with Braavos to forgive the attack that Alyn made, and the indemnity was so big that the Iron Throne had to borrow from the Iron Bank to pay the Sea Lord. So once again, the Iron Bank just finds themselves with all the debt in hand. They're like, yep, we own everyone's debt. The Rogares had their little Rogare Spring, a Lysine Spring, as it was called, but it didn't last that long. Yep, hard to go up against the top bank when they have those assassins probably on their side. And in the year 138, and a lot of people's one of people's favorite little tidbits here is that he goes to Raventree Hall and recovers the bones of Addam and goes back with them to Driftmark and buries them and just puts that one word epitaph on his tomb, which says loyal in I guess all caps, even maybe the way it's written. And yeah, it's great. I love that. I love that George included that. I love the way he wrote it. It's just it seems to fit really well. And a lot of people have referenced those lines as sort of like just a really great point. And eventually we know that despite this craziness with the blind dragon egg hatchling rather that bites Lena's arm, and Prince Aegon's or King Aegon's thoughts on dragons in general, which he was very scared of them and against them, he clearly backs down on that later in life because we know he tries to hatch eggs at some point. He brings mages over from the Far East, and hey, maybe that's one of that was on Oakenfist. Maybe he's the one who went over there to get them. Maybe he brought back these mages. Maybe that was his job. Part of his, he was told, hey, go bring us people that say they can hatch eggs. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities here. Also very tempting to think he went to Ashai or the Thousand Islands, basically places that his father went. On the other hand, that might be the opposite way to think about it. Maybe he wanted to go to all the places his father didn't go that he wanted to go. His father was, surely the world is huge. There's all these places that the Sea Snake probably wanted to sail to. They never could. Maybe Alyn did some of those things. But it's also easy to see that he maybe tried to retrace his father's steps in some places. Maybe a little of both. 6 voyages, and voyages aren't necessarily just to one place. You can go to multiple places on a voyage. So yeah, we can have it both ways. What else we have? So let's move on to the conquest of Dorne. This is way in the future. Basically what we have here is a long stretch of time between say 138, which is when the epitaph was done, and 157, which is right around the time that the conquest begins, but it's also the same year that Aegon III dies. We do have that. Looks like that super chat came through. Tommy Pappas sponsored Scott Wortman for a chat here, and he doesn't actually have a question. He says, I just want to say that I can't wait to meet you guys at Ice and Fire Con. Yeah, well, we can't wait for Ice and Fire Con either. Oh, yeah. I did make that shout out earlier to encourage you all to buy your tickets for Ice and Fire Con with the discount code Westeros. But I also want to remind you all that the price goes up on Friday. The early bird special is ending as of this recording on 2/26. So I suppose...
Are we code Westeros or history, or is it just we have to use history of Westeros?
It's history.
Yeah,
history.
You said Westeros.
Oh, did I? Oh, I'm sorry. History is the code.
Okay.
My bad. Thanks for catching that. I think I said it right earlier. But yes, it's always history.
Okay.
Yeah, that code is good for both Ice and Fire Con and Con of Thrones. Okay, so other possibilities here. So let's see. In 157 is when the war began. And here is where we have a quote, not from Fire and Blood, but from A Dance with Dragons. I know that tale as well, but Daron made too much of it in that vainglorious book of his. Ships won that war, not goat tracks. Oakenfist broke the planky town and swept halfway up the green blood, whilst the main Dornish strength was engaged in the Prince's Pass. Stannis drummed his fingers on the map. Stannis. Yep, Stannis would recognize the greatness of Oakenfist, being a naval commander himself and a student of history. And yeah, I mean, the Velaryons are his bannermen too, so there's a lot of connection there. And you got to agree, right? I mean, Stannis is, he's not right about everything, but this is military history. He's probably right that Oakenfist was crucial to the success of the invasion of Dorne, and it wasn't something that Aegon or any of the other would-be conquerors of Dorne tried. They didn't use naval strength. They just used their dragons. But, sometimes ships can do things better than dragons. Dragons are really awesome at just blowing everything up. But, ships have their own uses. So he was instrumental in winning the war. And as we know, the Dorne did not stay conquered. And when they rose up, the King Daron returned with his armies and his navies. And again, Oakenfist was the commander of the ships. We can pretty safely assume he was master of ships at this point. But, it's not 100% certain. We are talking him as a much older man at this point. So the he's too young thing doesn't really fly. And, but of course, not long after that, the young dragon was killed during a parley. And that was it for the war. The war ended, and the conquest of Dorne was abandoned because Baelor took over, because Daron I didn't have any kids. And Baelor the Blessed was Baelor the Blessed, and he was not about to send any invasions. He sent himself barefoot to walk the Prince's Pass, or the Boneway, rather. And that is a story that has nothing to do with Alyn Velaryon. But I do wonder what Alyn Velaryon did during Baelor's lifetime. He would not have had a bunch of orders to go fight people, that's for sure. I wonder if this is maybe when some of his voyages took place. He might have been a good time to do that, right? Head out to sea, go on an adventure when you've got this crazy Septon King doing his thing. An interesting possibility for an old mystery. It comes up here, and it's funny that Alyn is the guy that might be our connection point. It's long been wondered why Cregan Stark fought Aemon the Dragon Knight. For one thing, their ages are pretty far apart. They do overlap, but Rickon, who is son of Cregan, his heir, was killed near one of the final battles of the war. We think it was the initial conquest of Dorne and not the reconquest of Dorne. So it's possible that because this is such an important person, the heir to Winterfell, and Cregan's promise, the pact, was never fulfilled, they might have wanted to play this cautiously. So the theory is, and this is hats tip to Nina Friel for this one, that Alyn, brought Rickon's bones back to Winterfell, to the north, which gives us a potential time for Cregan and Aemon to fight. Now, again, I don't think Cregan and Aemon fought in earnest. Like, Cregan was trying to kill Aemon, but something had to happen, and this is a reasonable time for it. If we get any farther into the future, well, not only do we not have any sort of example as to giving us a reason why they would have had a fight, but Cregan just gets older and older, and it just becomes hard to imagine Aemon saying, "Oh, he's the finest swordsman I ever fought." If he was like in his 60s, it wouldn't be impossible. And we got Barris and Selmy representing 63-year-old guys who can still fight incredibly well. So it's definitely possible, but it's tough. It's tough to say. All right. So we have another important thing that comes later in his life is the aforementioned affair with Elena Targaryen. Now, Elena wanted to marry him, which strongly implies Baela had died at some point before Alyn. So Alyn outlasted Baela, or outlived Baela, which is too bad, but not 100% the case here. It just seems likely. Elena's probably not pining to marry a married man, at least not openly, especially because Elena seemed like a decent person. And they had twins, Jon and Jane Waters. So they were bastards, clearly. And that Jon and Jane Waters are the two that Yennefer Longwaters descends from. That opening quote from that very awkward figure that Jaime's talking to, the chief underjailer. And these two are his ancestors. That's that. So that's kind of our bookend on Alyn Velaryon here. The introduction with the quote from Jaime and wrapping it up with his ancestors. We don't know his other ancestor. Presumably the Montfort Velaryon and his son are descendants of Alyn, but we don't know that for sure. We do know for sure that Jon and Jane Waters' descendants, the Longwaters, are still out there. So who knows where else that Velaryon blood is. So in the last few minutes, I'm going to refer to an email from patron Kelly Lowry and her husband, who is also a patron, apparently, or I guess they're just co-patrons together as a married couple, she says, I am what one might call a nautical nerd. And they sent us a lot of interesting tidbits in reference to our Sun Chaser episode. And because this is such a nautical episode, I thought we would refer to some of the things that she is teaching us here. She says she's sailed historical tall ships, studied sail technology and ship design, and has used historical navigational tools for fun, she says, not for survival. She says, regarding the Sun Chaser episode with LML, he's correct when she says, LML is correct when he says Vikings went from coast to coast. For centuries, European trade ships would know the bearing of one point of land to the next and go in certain order. Port to port, and that would depend on the local trade winds and currents and tides. It's called caping, along with another common form of navigation called piloting. So this is sort of what we were talking about, but it's good to have this clarified and confirmed by someone who really knows what they're talking about. And oh, look at that. She is in the chat, J Dead Redhead. And she says, OMG, that's me. Yes, that is you. Thank you very much for this information. She refers to our mention of the currents, and she says, it reminds me of Columbus's men freaking out because they knew the earth was round, but the trade wind they sailed with was continuously blowing east. So their thought is, well, how do we get back? Which we did reference that in the Sun Chaser episode. Like, that would be the fear of a lot of people. Like, well, we're going to sail east, or west rather, but how do we get back home? Now she says, she goes on here and says, as far as navigation, or lack of it, currents, trade winds, and inability to see the stars are all factors that could account for not being able to get back to the Summer Isles. So in this case, she's referring to the Hightower ship that tried to get back to Old Town and ended up in Sithorios. Well, they tried to via the Summer Islands, and they completely missed the Summer Isles. So she says, and explaining the problem with tacking. Oh gods, where do I even start? It's hard on the ship and the sails, and it's even harder on the crew. So tacking means going against the wind. Essentially, I think it's probably a better way to explain that, but it's basically going against the wind. So this is what we're talking about. No wonder it's so hard for them to go where they need to go when the wind is just not allowing them to. Referring to the design of the Sun Chaser, she says, the Carrack took over a year to build because the Braavosi galley's pieces can be mass-produced if that's all you're building. Carracks and other hull designs require completely different pieces and all methods for fastening. It would have had to be, this is my words here, it would have had to be handmade, not just in like some sort of a mold or anything like that. And it would have to be custom built. And she says the different pieces of a ship are different types of wood. You don't just build a ship out of one type of wood, all parts of it. And she says the different raw materials could come from different parts of the world, which would add delays. And she says it's usually Carrack or Carrick. So I'm saying it wrong. Carrack is wrong. It's Carrick or Carrick or Carrack. All right. And she says, I can't believe you guys mentioned Alice Westhill sailing past Estermont while Rhaena was there and did not utter the phrase like ships passing in the night. Well, that was a good opportunity for a pun. But technically, Rhaena wasn't on a ship. She was just on an island. So that's my defense for not making that joke. Now she's going to reference here women and being bad luck on ships. She says, there is nothing that makes me more defensive or more confrontational than someone bringing this up. First, because there is no end to what men are willing to blame on women. Absolutely true. That's my words. And second, everyone forgets about the other thousands of ridiculous things considered bad luck at one time or another on ships. This is definitely true from my experience as well. Not from sailing, but from reading history. And sailors and luck, they're so superstitious. And yes, women was a thing, but they were superstitious about a million things. So she's got, it's, in other words, she's not saying it's false. This did happen. The superstition against women was very strong and very powerful. But it's not as big or as diverse as as maybe a lot of people have led to believe. In fact, I probably exaggerated how common it was. She says it only comes up in the Victorian era, which I did think it was more common than that. So my fault, I suppose. But that's good to know. Good to know that it was only in the Victorian era and that it was not a superstition elsewhere. So if you see people bringing up the women superstition thing in another era, tell them that they're probably wrong. Superstitions and omens all around the Sunchaser story. She continues here. I've never heard of the one about the maggots, but dolphins playing and racing along are believed to be good luck. However, she says, the wind finally returned one day near sunset when the sky turned red as blood, but the look of it set men to muttering. That's a quote from Fire and Blood, of course. According to her, the way it works is red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in the morning, sailors take warning. And so there you go. That was apparently backwards because it says when it says because the quote says the sky turned red as blood near sunset, which is supposed to be red sky at night, sailors delight. So maybe George got that backwards. She says the red sky at night was a positive sign and a good omen, but in the real world. But then Sir Eustace continues, I told them it boded well for us, but I lied. This is a no-no. Never, ever utter the words good luck on anything like it aboard ship and do not knowingly lie. That's definitely a new one for me. I hadn't heard that at all. I hadn't even heard the inkling of that thing. So apparently you don't talk about good luck in that sense, or you don't say the words good luck. Now she has some thoughts on the pigs on the Targaryen Islands there. She says, sailors' superstitions abound here would get a pig tattoo and a chicken tattoo, one on each foot, because they believed if swept overboard, pigs and chickens can sense where the nearest land is and swim that way. Let's not kid ourselves. Pigs and chickens can drown, but apparently these pigs on these islands were either put there or swam ashore from sinking ships in the vicinity. In the 1500s, the Spanish dropped pigs off the island known as Mona between the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, in the body of water known as the Mona Passage. The English settlers used a low-lying island across from Jamestown Island in Virginia for the same purpose. That island is now called Hog Island Wildlife Refuge. And she also adds that she thinks she's heard that pigs will turn wild in less than 3 generations. All right, a couple more factoids here. The dynamic of the Sunchaser continuing on while Sir Eustace turns back after witnessing the third ship go down. She says that almost the exact same thing happened on Martin Frobisher's first voyage to the Arctic in 1576. Quote, not far from sight of Greenland, he lost company of his small ship, which by means of the great storm he supposed to be swallowed up of the sea, wherein Frobisher lost only 4 men. Also the other bark, named the Michael, mistrusting the matter, conveyed themselves privily away from him and returned home with great report that he was cast away. So that is from the Voyages of Elizabethan Seamen, Selected Narratives, Oxford, Elizabeth Seamen. Yes, what? Remember, hey, that's actually pretty funny because there's that weird, long-standing historical, tinfoil theory that Elizabeth was a man, which is a bizarre theory, but it's persistent and easily debunked. But hey, I just accidentally referred to it. Here's another cool anecdote she gives us. Also on Sir Francis Drake's circumnavigation, aka F the Spanish for real. This voyage is bonkers. They start with 3 ships, then they steal some on the way south, then they use those to steal and rob others. In the process, get those banged up. They abandon some. By the time they get to the Straits of Magellan, they're back down to 3. The smaller one, the Marigold, goes down in a crazy storm. The second ship, the Elizabeth, loses sight of Drake and just gives up and goes back home, leaving Drake on his own aboard the Pelican, whose name he just changed to the Golden Hind. And apparently, it's bad luck to rename a ship. She types that in all caps. So, I'm going to say a couple other things in reference to some of this, because I'm a big fan of Sir Francis Drake's story. And there's a podcast I've referenced before called the Pirate History Podcast. It gives into great, great detail. And we are patrons of that show, in fact. And he talks about Sir Francis Drake quite a lot, in addition to a lot of other famous mariners of the Caribbean. And eventually he talks about some pirates in the Mediterranean as well, the Barbary pirates, and a lot of these really amazing stories. So I've given them a shout out before, but it's been probably a couple years. So it's a good time to bring that up again if you're into this nautical stuff. There's a lot of attention to detail with regards to that, with regards to sailing and ships and sailors' attitudes. It's not just about the the piracy and all that. All those things work together. So anyway, all right. One more anecdote from this letter, because it's pretty cool. Whale strikes. Sadly, this happens a lot. I was really happy Ashea brought up the whale ship. Essex, that is. In the book, In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick, it's mentioned how aggressive/protective male sperm whales called bulls can be toward ships. Even now, in modern days, they sometimes attack fishing trawlers. Here's an account from Frobisher's second voyage in 1578. This same day, the Salamander, being under both her courses and bonnets, which are sails and extensions, happened to strike a great whale with her full stem with such a blow that the ship stood still and stirred neither forward nor backward. The whale threat made a great and ugly noise and cast up his whole body and tail and so went under the water. Ooh. Oh, sorry. The whale thereat made a great and ugly noise. Anyway, yeah, sometimes these old style writing versions of English are hard to read. So that's really amazing. And by the way, Francis Drake's nickname was El Draco, as in the dragon. A little footnote there for you. Okay, so I loved that. Thank you very much for that email. That was very informative and added a lot of color to the Sunchaser episode as well as to this one. I wish I could move that over to the Sunchaser episode, but most people will catch both, because we've got loyal listeners around here. Speaking of, thanks very much everyone who came today, for participating in the chat, for liking and subscribing to us on YouTube and on iTunes and on Acast and on Google Play and on SoundCloud and all the different places you can listen to us. Thank you to Ashea for running production and handling all the chats and comments. Thank you to Michael Klarfeld for the video intro outro. Thank you to all of our patrons who support the show, and everybody else out there, all fellow Westorians who are in our Facebook group and who support us on Twitter and everywhere else. There's too many ways for me to say thanks, so I'll just say thanks to everybody and leave it at that for now. We will see you guys next time. Valar reread us, and it's time for the Patreon credits. First off, thanks to Lord Mark of House Joseph, the Snow in Winterfell, rider of Mazalacartho, the white dragon with green scales, horns, wings, and talons. The mysterious BR is Hand to the King. The Smiling Wolf is Lord Stephen Stark of the Broken Tower, soldier, scholar, philosopher, diplomat, Hand to Queen Ashea, who is known as the best. Lord Jim the Fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog and Warden of the West is also a podcaster under the name To Wage War, and he was inactive for a little while, but that show is back from its hiatus. He did an episode, a Mongol-related episode, back in January, so check that out. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning is Lord of the Chiliad and Warden of the East. Gabeth the Unfrozen is Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods and Warden of the North. Lady Kelly McMath of Covington is Lady of the Villa Hills and Crescent Springs, Warden of the South. Lord James Tuttle is King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, Commander of the Royal Fleet, consisting of the Narrow Fleet led by flagship Caraxes and the Bloodstone Fleet led by flagship Prince Daemon. By his time, Mercalio Rendoon is a distant memory. The small council includes Lord Daniel, the sneaky Russian, master of ships, Grand Maester Via James, Lord Benjen of House Hornwood, master of laws, Lord Fabian Flowers, the bastard of Greenshield, master of coin, Lord Johann of House Orcos, called Shadowhawk, master of whisperers. Lady Direliz of Castle Naki is the alpha patron, Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell is breaker of the second stone, Lord Skip of the Veldt is lord of Castle Ganges, Gregor the Toasty is lord of the Breadfort, Alicia Everlasting of the Green Blood is lady of Desert Rose, Lord Ryan of Castle Stonegate is guardian of the Rocky Mountain Pass. Lord Garin de Haviland is of Devil's Hand Keep. Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's Eye, lady of Castle Skyfall. Lady Mikkel of Moonacre is leader of the Werewood Protectorate Alliance. The Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest is wielder of the Valyrian steel machete Everglazed. Lord Alistair Whitaker is lord of the Dawnhold. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny is guardian ranger of the hidden 100-acre Werewood, dual wielder of Valyrian short swords Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise, sharpshooter of the Werewood and Ironwood laminated longbow Todd Von Oben. Brian the Defender is lord of the Spearfort and the Freelands, last scion of Clan McCulloch, strength and courage. The bastard of the Wolfswood is first forester of the Old Gods, sworn to House Iron Werewood. Listen for the silence. Connor the Dungeon Master is lord of Catamount Keep and guardian of the Smoky Mountain Pass. Lady Baelish is Dark Widow of Harrenhal. Lord Sidney Jesse is the Fallborn, lord of Blue Spring. Navessa the Twin-Hearted, a suspected skin changer, is holder of Castle Carahelm. Sir Valentin of House de Jen is creator of the Game of Predictions, free Game of Thrones predictions/futures market. Lady Lyanna Kelly of Wolf Island is protectress of the Steelhold. Casey Stark is of House Acres. Lady Kay of House Archer is lady of Earthdog Hall, huntress of the Wolfswood, and guardian of Maddie Squirrelsbane, the mighty Direweenie. King's Justice is Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian steel blade Fate. Shea's Queen's High Council includes Bloody Ben Blackwood, Master of Whisperers, Rebea Star Eyes, Lady of Waves and Mistress of Ships, Captain of the Iron Shadow Cat. In the shadows we bear our claws. And Grand Maester Elizabeth is middle daughter of Lyanna Mormont, first lady to forge both the silver and Valyrian steel links. Our Lord Commander of our Kingsguard is Miriam R., backed up by Sir Dolores D., the longest tenured White Sword. Willa Crowsbane, Guardian of White Tree, First Lady of the Free Folk. Sir Dean the White, Knight of the Black Star. Sir Jord of House Pepsi, the Beverage Knight. And Gregor Snow, called Snow Bear, a bastard of Winterfell. The Queen's Guard is led by Lord Captain Commander Hema Hillmonth, the Sellsword Sentinel. Alexander of House Atreides, from the Seat of Dune. I must not fear. Fear is the Mind Killer. Becca the Bard, Songbird of the North. Michonne the Melodious, Star of Old Town, Minds over Masters. Sir Rambo, Knight of House Gannon, First Blood. Sir Leon of House Walker, wielder of the twin Valyrian steel blades, Fire and Ice, and the Werewood bow Rain. Amber the Adamant, the Knight of Mist, and Mother of Squids. Our Beard Guard is led by Lord Commander George the Golden, backed up by Sir Joshua Oakhart, the White Oak, Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor, Sir Jeff, Warden of the AC, wielder of Triad, the multifaceted Beard of Platinum, Red and Brown, Stay Frosty, Sir Tim Corgyle, Mad Boy of the Western Desert, and Queen Helena von Landstein, partying like it's 1999 since 1980-something. A kingdom for a drink. Last but certainly not least, the History of Westeros Night's Watch, led by Lord Commander Benjen Umber, the Silent Giant, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Greatsword Winter's Kiss. First Builder Maegor Snow, a.k.a. Maegor the Cool, the Fire in the Snow. First Steward Sir Jurion of the Torrentine, called Pale Wind. And leading the rear, First Ranger Sir Sorstelica of House Gramercy. Thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next week. I will announce the topic within a couple days. We've had to rearrange some of our topic order, so that's a little bit up in the air, but just like Oakenfist, we'll get it all settled, squared away, and come back with a whole bunch of notes and fun discussions next time. Until then, you know what to do. Valar reread us.